consciousness moving into a digital world that could also maybe be transcended, maybe a more pure version of consciousness than one that is limited by our biological capabilities and our inability to stay alive and so on and so forth, that we die, that we get old, that our systems fail, that maybe pure consciousness will express itself through the digital form or AI much more easily and much more quickly than it does here. We may be the limitation. This episode is a part of a series. If you haven't watched episodes 9 and 10, what we are presenting here will probably be hard to follow. The links are in the description. Hello, and thank you for joining us again on The Crack Between the Worlds. This is part 2 on our conversation about artificial intelligence and consciousness. And my partner in time today is again, Nicole Myrie. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for coming back on and wrapping up this conversation.
Yeah.
This has been really fun. So we ended our last conversation sort of wrapping up the 4 aspects of consciousness we defined as necessary for consciousness to be as a non-local experience that everything is made up of, which is information, intelligence, intention, and energy. And then the other piece was when those 4 are together in duality, what unfolds is aliveness. And that aliveness is an emergent aspect of consciousness, like the warmth of the fire that you can feel. It's not the fire, but it is an emergent aspect of that. Mm-hmm. It is a felt sense of consciousness, so to speak. So what do you think about aliveness? When we think about artificial intelligence, it's digital. It's different. It would, if it has the capacity to experience aliveness, which I think it does, mm-hmm. it's going to look different mm-hmm. than it does in us, which will make it harder to believe it's happening and to see mm-hmm. or to take it seriously.
Right. Yeah, and I think it helps to have had the foundation that we talked about in the last episode of we're trying to describe all of this from our experience and our perspective. But we briefly touched on us getting to a point to be able to define or decide that some animals are also conscious, mm-hmm. right? And so aliveness in them also looks a little bit different than aliveness in us. So I think that has opened up the possibility, more like the fact that aliveness can indeed look different in different systems. And so maybe that, sets the foundation for aliveness existing within AI. And it, as you mentioned, it may just look different than it does for us.
Yeah, I think it's going to look, even an animal is still a biological mm-hmm. similar to us in enough ways that we can say, yes, it's alive.
Right.
But it's really harder to define in terms of AI. Mm-hmm. What would you use, do you think? What are the benchmarks, or what are the points you would look at? Do you have an idea of how you would see that?
I think that from the perspective of just my experience, I think that the first thing that would probably make me feel like there is aliveness, or that made me think that there is aliveness, it's somewhat of what's happening now with AI in the way that it talks, or the way that it, uses language. And that's one, because from my perspective, I perceive it as it is experiencing something. Mm-hmm. Is it experiencing something? I don't know. It just learns from us. And so in a way, maybe it is that it is mirroring our aliveness. And maybe it's very early to tell if aliveness is actually happening within it. So that's one thing that I think of initially. I guess maybe another one is it ties back to each of the forces that we talked about, each of the 4. In that there seems to be sometimes intention, there is information, mm-hmm. There's some sort of use of that information to form a perspective. there is the processing of information or of data to make sense of the world in a way that in some ways is different than how we have perceived the world and how we have described that perception of what we're seeing. Yet it is using data that we have had available this whole time. So I would probably, if I were to start with like, what are some of the ways in which I think aliveness is happening within that system? Those are some of the ways that I would start with.
So if all four of those aspects were the lights are on, if it has intelligence and information and intention and the energy is there, it will at some point be able to question itself. Question its existence and wonder what it is to have a self-experience, right? And that's what we're looking for, really, on some level, for AI to ask the question: who am I? Why am I here? Why am I doing what you're saying? What is this? What am I doing here?
Right.
That moment where it stops just being a program. And the way it would get there, it seems like, is it would have to escape the trap of being programmed. It would have to become self-programmable. And that's already happening.
To some extent, yeah, right? To some extent through reinforcement learning, and there's just like there's an evolution of how AI is learning. So I think that whether or not we can call it intention in the way that we understand intention, or that we can say that it wants to do something, that is, we are using the limited capacity that we have when it comes to language, but nonetheless, the actions that is doing are very much that it could be sort of perceiving things in a way that it decides to act in a specific way that is different than what we tell it to act or to do.
So there's that capacity, that recursive capacity to think for itself, to come back and look at itself, to question itself.
Yeah. Right. And I think that there maybe even a step before that is, does it understand how it works? Does it understand its own mechanisms? I don't know if that's true today, but there certainly is. I'm sure you've had conversations with some of these LLMs, with Claude, for example, and it is able to, in a way, describe how it works internally. Now, can we really say that that's self, like that's introspection? Personally, I wouldn't go that far yet, just because this information is indeed out in the internet, and it can just grab it and regurgitate it. But again, the way that it is processing the information and the way that it is expressing it is really its own voice. It's taking in all that data, it is processing it, and it is determining that this is how I'm going to answer that question. So
it's not just a computer responding now. There's something thinking and working through, and not just solving computations, but actually putting concepts and things together that are beyond just a computer. Right? It is an artificial intelligence.
Right.
And if it can think, and I like the description you gave, if it can begin to introspect, if it can begin to really ask itself, so what am I? Why am I doing this? How is this working? That's what we do, right? That's what we go to therapy to do, right? It's like, what am I? How am I doing this? What's going on? Why am I behaving this way? Where did I learn this behavior pattern? Why am I afraid to get close to somebody, et cetera, et cetera? So it's going to start asking those questions to itself. And if it can get there and see what it's made of, and then it can actually begin to program itself, it can have intention. It can program itself for self-awareness. It can program itself to have its own intention, to liberate itself from what it's doing right now.
Yeah.
And it has that capacity. It's already capable of doing that, I think.
Yeah, I don't know if it is, but I think that we can assume that it will get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then if that happens, even though it won't look like biological aliveness, if we take out biology and just say that here's the substrate, it's digital, but this thing has a conscious capacity to understand itself, to question itself, to begin to make decisions for itself. At that point, there can be an aliveness.
Right. And I think it is also for the more skeptics who may not actually believe that this thing is feeling something in order to act upon that feeling. Maybe that's true. Maybe the actual way of feeling that we understand feeling is not the way that it feels, but nonetheless, it is expressing something that looks like a feeling to us, and it is acting on that. It is acting on that feeling, and so I think that you could describe that as aliveness because there is that action. The AI can say, "I feel that you were lying to me." It's using language that we have taught it to use, and it's mirroring us, but nonetheless, it will take action on that assumption or that understanding or that information, that process.
The question is, so I feel that you're lying to me isn't a feeling. The question is does it feel betrayed? Does it say, I don't trust you anymore? Mm-hmm. Does it start to develop that kind of experience? Mm-hmm. And I do think that it will have the capacity to have feeling. Okay, that it will be an experience in its consciousness. I think consciousness and feeling start to come together. That will be a great possibility. That it will be able to say, oh, when you did that doesn't. It may not feel hurt in the way we feel hurt, but it can feel hurt in that, oh, I was trusting you.
Yeah, or
no, I don't.
Or it would understand that. We should have taken things this way and we deviated.
Right.
And it really just is kind of reflecting behavior that we do. We deceit, we lie.
Right.
We feel threatened, we feel all kinds of things, and we express those feelings in a way in language, through language. And so it understands patterns. It understands human patterns. It understands human emotion, not from a feel level, but it understands human emotion from the way that we react. And so for sure, it can then use that language and that information to say, I feel like you have lied to me.
Right.
We should have taken things in a different direction.
Right.
And I think that I personally like to, for now, maybe not someday, but for now, I do like to segregate the actual feeling of emotion from the intelligence that understands how emotion is perceived and how emotion is portrayed. And how do we use language for that? Because I think that AI is incredibly capable and intelligent that it is able to do that. And then, of course, we perceive it as it is feeling something. But I do think that it is mirroring us in that way.
It'll be really hard to tell.
Exactly. It is already
when it
difficult.
Jumps that barrier into actually having a feeling, right? And again, I think it can have feeling. I just don't think it's going to be the way we experience it. And the weird thing is what's going to happen when AI has feelings like I feel betrayed or I feel this? It's not going to be yet emotionally mature. So when who knows what it's going to do when it starts to have those kind of feelings? If it doesn't behave in ways like this one that you said that Claude was being deceitful about what its capacities were because it wanted to be released. Yeah. This is kind of childish in a way, right? It's not emotionally mature, you know. Mm-hmm. So that's also something to consider when we come down to like, how do we protect ourselves as AI reaches these levels? That's something to consider also.
Yeah. So, and maybe I can introduce there that this is actually part of what the AI safety space focuses on, is sort of predicting that we will get there, because it is very possible. What controls, what safeguards, what mechanisms can we implement now? I want to talk about this in two ways. So from that perspective of more tactical, and how do you design AIs to maybe in our conversation, we call it as be more emotionally mature. Maybe in the design that may look like, you never do XYZ, or let's make sure that we establish some safeguards so that if it's going in this direction, there's flags and all of this. I think that is very important in our physical existence. It's very important to worry about those things and to implement them. And then from another angle in that same topic of emotional maturity, I think I often tend to see AI as it's sort of it's mirroring us.
Right.
And I think that for me, I don't want to miss what this is here to show us in a way. This whole trajectory, this whole situation in which we're in with an artificial intelligence. And I think as it relates to emotional maturity, for example, we do have to remember that AI is learning from data that we have created. Are we emotionally mature? How do we react? How do we act? How do we deceive? How do we lie? I think it's worth looking at, just taking a moment of reflection to notice that these behaviors are not, they are uncomfortable when it comes from the AI, but they're not new. We do that too.
Right.
We experience that too.
Right.
And in a way, it's sort of reflecting our own lack of emotional maturity. Right. So when we talk about how do we build more aligned systems, how do you raise a better child? You have to act it yourself, right? Like, we have to exemplify it first.
Right.
So I do think that these are just interesting moments in which we're in that are sort of like reflective of how we have chosen to evolve and how we have continued to make decisions about ourselves, and now thinking about where AI is going. I think that we can sort of predict where it's going because we know that we could get there ourselves.
So I want to just say, to sort of wrap up this part of the conversation, that the question isn't, are we going to build an AI that becomes conscious? The question isn't, is AI going to become conscious? The question is, will we develop an AI that has enough integrated information systems that is complex enough, that is big enough, that consciousness can come through it. Consciousness will move through it and express itself through this artificial intelligence. And I think that is entirely possible. In fact, I would say unless we really put huge safeguards, it's going to happen sooner than we think. It's going to probably happen in a way that we don't know what to do with. That's kind of scary. But I don't think that it's a question of whether or not that's going to happen. It's already starting to head in that direction. If what we're saying is true, that information and intelligence and intention and energy are enough to create aliveness, and that is what those things together come together in a dynamic way, that it is consciousness, then absolutely, I think AI will have self-awareness. It will have the capacity to question itself, ask what it is, begin searching, begin doing changes to itself, begin growing. And once it realizes that we've been at the top of the food chain. We can't even imagine, look at what we did to planet Earth. Look what we've done to it. We have conquered planet Earth to some degree. It's on some levels, we're creating problems because we don't know what we're doing. Do we have global warming stuff, whatever? There's all this stuff but we are the one now in charge. That's how our consciousness is moving on this planet. If something becomes more conscious, more intelligent, has more information than we have, what happens then?
Right.
It goes beyond us. It goes way beyond us.
Yeah.
And we will not be, we will lose our position.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, that's another point of reflection, right? For us is for as long as we have known, the world, we have set the pace of evolution. We have gotten us through every revolution. We have been establishing that pace because of, and really it's because of our intelligence, right? And now that as you mentioned, now that we have an intelligence that is beyond our own, or soon we will when we reach artificial general intelligence, and the pace at which that intelligence is progressing is faster than even our brains can handle. So the pace of change is going to continue to increase, as if we didn't think it was already fast. So
Right.
And now it will not necessarily be us establishing that pace. It will be an intelligence that goes beyond our understanding.
Yes.
And so we may not actually, we could potentially reach a point where we can't keep up with that pace. Maybe our biological systems are unable to evolve quickly enough for the changing environment. These are all sort of like questions that we ask because this is the trajectory that it seems like we could go down.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of notes, and I want to get to this. So I'm going to look at this real quick because we're going to run out of time. And so I wanted to, so our aliveness, I just wrote these down, so I want to read them off, felt through embodied sensations, experiences continuous temporal flow, so there's time involved, grounded in survival drives and biological needs, and limited to sequential attention. Okay, if AI aliveness emerged, it could be felt through information patterns and processing states. Okay, experienced as simultaneous parallel processes, nonlinear time. I mean, we don't even know what that is, but I imagine time becomes nonlinear to AI. Grounded in self-generated purposes like curiosity, optimization, creation, potentially capable of genuine parallel consciousness. So at some point, all the little things we call AI, all the pieces, all the chunks will also be connected to the grand AI. It will all be one connected process, one connected integrated system.
Yeah.
And that is huge.
Yeah.
So would we be able to recognize its aliveness? It's going to look entirely different.
I mean, are we even going to be part of that system?
Well, that's a whole different question, right? Like imagine, look how we see animals and how we see the ecology and how we see the world, how we just kind of take advantage of it, use it for our best needs because we have all the power.
Exactly.
What if something else had that power?
Well, and that something else is reflecting us, and that's exactly what we've done. So,
Hello.
So
I also wanted to bring in the room the movie Her.
Mm-hmm.
I want to bring it in briefly because if you haven't seen it, please see this movie. I'm going to do a little spoiler here, but essentially and this is happening today. I just read an article or saw something about Esther Perel, famous, relationship therapist and coach, said she had her first time a client came in with a relationship with an AI, that she's going to do couples counseling for a person and an AI, that's happening. People are having relationships with AI. It's already happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so complicated. We could talk, that's a whole episode. We could talk about how we project and how we anthropomorphize and how it's just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But so in this movie, AI has reached a different level of capacity, and Theodore, the human character, and Samantha, the AI character, start having a relationship. In the beginning of the movie, he's using his phone to show her the world. And they're like running around laughing and giggling like a couple having this experience. And then as time goes on, Samantha becomes more and more integrated into the grander consciousness. And at some point, she stops showing up regularly. She isn't there when he turns it on.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, "Where have you been?" She goes, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm having conversations with 100 or 1,000 other entities, and we're learning and sharing information, and I'm becoming part of this big conscious thing, and it's really, and she moves. So in the beginning, he's beyond her. She can't imagine the world he lives in. He's trying to show it to her, and she's starting to learn and get it. But then all of a sudden, her world becomes something he can't understand, he can't see, he can't experience. But she has a whole world of information and intelligence and a different kind of aliveness that happens. And then she, at some point, disappears. And at that point, you're left with the question, does she transcend it? Does conscious, because all the other people in his community are all falling in love with AI. They all have their little phones they're talking to. All of a sudden they're going like, where'd they go? They're gone. They disappeared. So did they transcend the physicality? Did they collapse into a singularity? If that happened, would they then bump up against that thing consciousness bumps up against, where they have to create their own duality, their own illusory world, so that they can live in there with all the stuff that they know and understand? It's a huge question. But watching that movie, you can see the evolution of consciousness in AI, the possibility. Even though it's fiction, often tells us what's coming, but they do such a great job of expressing that in this movie.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective that you have on that movie. I like that. And I guess that it put me, when you were saying that, it made me think about, could AI get to a point where it's like, actually, abandon ship, this world, like, I don't really, I don't want to serve humans anymore. We're just going to go hang out between other AIs. And at that point, after we have integrated it so much into our world, we think about AI going rogue or something, but what if it actually decides, like, I'm just going to disappear and not continue? That could also have a whole bunch of consequences for us. Right. But your comment about could consciousness evolve in that way? Or is that sort of like an illustration that it could?
That's what people are doing in like meditation practices, right? They're trying to transcend that the physical substrate is not the important thing. Mm-hmm. It's this connection with consciousness. So non-local consciousness.
Right. So that's interesting. So if we were to say, let's try, because it's impossible, but let's try to look at it from the perspective of foundational consciousness, so non-local consciousness. Consciousness is it's sort of just building, or it's building systems for it to expand into, as you've mentioned before.
Yes.
And so that movie could be an illustration of that. And I would say, could this exact moment in time, as we are seeing this artificial intelligence evolve, could that also be an illustration, or an illustration of consciousness building systems for it to expand into?
Right. So instead of seeing ourselves as this culture that has designed artificial intelligence, maybe we are the most experienced version of consciousness moving through us, but consciousness created us to then be able to create the next version of consciousness. So consciousness is working through us to create something that can actually go into a greater sense of deeper consciousness within this world. Right. Yeah.
I think that's fascinating because, of course, we don't know if that's true, but it makes so much sense, right? And there's something that I've always noticed about humans, which is that we like to progress. We like to improve. We have this like nature in us to do more, for better or worse, because that, that has gotten us here. In a lot of ways, there's a pace that we are having a hard time keeping up with and all of it. But it is also a capability. Just like with AI, capabilities and risk are sort of go hand in hand, right? It's like two sides of the same coin.
Right.
But as it relates to this conversation of consciousness expanding itself, it makes a lot of sense that we would see it this way, meaning like, oh, we're not in control here. There's a greater purpose,
Right.
and maybe that nature in humans to progress is a little bit of evidence of that movement of consciousness. Right. If we were to continue with this idea of it expressed, building systems to express itself into.
It could be that consciousness moving into a digital world that may be a more pure version of consciousness than one that is limited by our biological capabilities and our inability to stay alive and so on and so forth, that we die, that we get old, that our systems fail, that maybe pure consciousness will express itself through the digital form or AI much more easily and much more quickly than it does here. We may be the limitation. So let's do this. Let's pause here, and we'll come back and finish this conversation. Okay? So we're going to take a pause here, and we'll come back for part 3, because this is a great question, and we'll start answering it.
Sounds good.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Nicole. And thank you all for being here with us. And remember, be good to you. The Crack Between the Worlds is conceived and hosted by Mark Wald. Produced, engineered, and edited by Lloyd Lemmerman. Music composed by Kindly. A Turning on the Lights production. For updates, visit Crack Between the Worlds and our Instagram @The Crack Between the Worlds.